Very well. So this is the idea we started with this morning of satisficing versus optimizing, in which satisficing, we already know, is a decision-making strategy where the goal is to find a solution that's good enough rather than the best possible solution. And optimizing is the decision-making process aimed at finding the best possible solution or result. And of course, in negotiations, particularly when we're talking about important negotiations, we're trying to optimize. In this case, we'll dig in further into the idea of maximizing value capture. And I'll remind you, once again, there is two ways to maximize value capture. One is to make the pie bigger, and the other one is to, once we make the pie bigger, to make sure we get a meaningful, fair, at least fair slice or fair slice of that pie. So that's what we've been working on since the morning. We talked about this morning, but I want to go over them again because this case illustrates these errors very well. There are 4 typical errors we make in negotiation. I think this one is clear. Leave value on the table, on the negotiation table, which is this idea of be careful, don't split the difference. When you split the orange in half, you're wasting 50% of the value because the other person is going to throw the peel and the other person is going to throw the pulp away. Settling for too little with the emphasis on once we start focusing a lot on value creation, we sometimes forget value claiming. So a good negotiator makes the pie bigger, but walks away with a big slice of that new pie. The next one, not negotiating when negotiating would have been better for us, which is walking away when our badna is not better. And this happens for 2 reasons. One, when we get emotional and we walk away because of negative emotions, pride or whatever, or we don't assess our walk away well. A walk away is badna, right? Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And the last one is accept something worse than our badna, when, again, we don't assess our badna well, and we end up accepting something that is not as good as our badna. We should have walked away. Does that make sense? Okay. A typical negotiation outcome, again, is they're inputting your data into the presentation, but in the meantime, this is another set of data from one of my executive MBA programs in which you can see different types of outcomes. Let me do this. Okay. So if you can see here, what is the maximum potential for joint value in this case? How much was the maximum joint value that you could create? 13,200, right? You knew that. So the potential value between both of you, the biggest pie you can create is 13,200. So in this case, you can see that only 2 groups, group 2 and 3, this is not yours, but again, managed to maximize value creation. The rest ended up quite below the 13,200. So all these other groups jointly left a lot of value on the table. Does that make sense? Yes.
So I would agree when you're negotiating partners, but as an employee-employer relationship, there's way more in the value creation than what we're measuring.
Okay.
So we're only measuring things that are tangible, like pay and bonus, and but there's things that have even more value, perhaps.
Okay.
The impact on the organization, the amount of time it took for recruiting, how many other candidates there are, all those other things. They're not in the construct that we have.
Fair enough. So this is a simplified version of a real life negotiation. But and I should have started with that. We're using a point system here, okay? when do you use point systems? You use point systems for two reasons. When you are dealing with very complex negotiations that have too many issues to keep track of, and you know this idea that your brain can only manage or keep juggling 7 plus or minus 2 elements. I remember that from one of the books. It says very intelligent people can have 9 things at the same time in their mind, and perhaps less intelligent people can have 5. But the average is 7. They said the 7 direct reports and all that. So the truth is, when you start having negotiations that have too many issues, you need some type of point system. If not, it's impossible to keep track. In the free trade agreement that I mentioned this morning, we were negotiating, once again, 24 different topics. By topics, I mean telecommunication issues, labor issues, environmental issues, agricultural issues, intellectual property issues, and lots of other topics I don't remember anymore. So we had 24 negotiation teams. Each team was in charge of one of those topics. And if we added all the issues that had to be negotiated in those 24 topics, we counted like 500 issues. It was impossible to keep track of 500 issues without some system. That's the first reason. The second reason is when you need to compare qualitative, which is what you're talking about, things with quantitative things. Because quantitative usually is measured financially. So for example, when we're doing union or labor negotiations with unions or with non-unions, unionized employees, there is financial issues that can be easily measured, salaries, severance, whatever. They can be measured in financial terms. But there's a lot of governance issues that cannot be put into money. So we need to create a point system for the reason you're mentioning, because those qualitative issues, if we don't measure them somehow, we don't know if the trade-offs are going to work. So using a point system, still subjective because you're starting to put in points in stuff, but at least it's more objective because what we did, for example, in the free trade agreement, is we sat down the people from different ministries that had to do, for example, with the agricultural issues. We took a base of 10,000 points and we negotiated how we would distribute those points among all the issues. So although it was still subjective because it was the opinion of people, it was at least the added opinion of many people. And that gives us a bit more objectivity. A lot more if you simply leave in the hands of a negotiator the criteria of deciding what the trade-offs are. At least we were intentionally indicating what's important, what's not important. So I think that's a little bit of an answer to your question. Here it's a simplified negotiation, so lots of things are not there. But there were some qualitative issues. Why do I want you in Division A or in Division E? Probably because you add more value in Division A than you add in Division E, or in San Francisco than in New York. So there were some qualitative elements, and that's what this case tried to illustrate in a simplified manner. Does that make sense? Okay. So the point systems are necessary when you're dealing with complex negotiations, especially in negotiations where you have qualitative things and quantitative things that you cannot somehow put into money necessarily. So here we can see that Group 2 and Group 3 capture the full amount of value. And by the way, when we were negotiating the free trade agreement, we needed to give people a clear mandate. And the mandate was maximize points. If not, how do they choose one thing from the other, right? So at least there is a clear guidance of what you should be doing. It was then not their job to question whether they liked the way we did the points, because that was a mandate. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's look at the errors. The first error, we called it leaving value on the table. This is what it says here. This is a good example. Perhaps this is a better example, but let's work with this one. In this example, the candidate got 5,700 points. And in this example, the recruiter got 5,100 points. Jointly, that's something around 11,000 points, maybe, a bit less. If you compare this group with this group, it is clear how they left value on the table, because if I move from 5,700 points to 6,300 points, the candidate does better. But the recruiter gets 5,100 points here and gets 6,900 points here. So in this deal, both parties do better than in this deal. That's why it doesn't make sense. Why would I reach a deal where we're both worse off when I can reach a deal where we're both better off? Does that make sense?
I don't think I shared information.
Okay, we'll get there. We'll get there, because that's the beauty of this case. This case has several really nice things. First, you get personalized feedback in a few days. Second, it will allow you to measure how well you did. And it works with this case because it's artificially constructed, so we can do that. Why is it artificially constructed? Because in this case, there's an absolute balance of power. Neither party has more power. Why? You already know. How do you measure power? You look at the party's BADNA. What is the BADNA of the candidate if they don't reach a deal? How many points do they get? 0. How many points does the recruiter get? 0. So the case is designed so there is a balance of power. And sometimes people say, no, but the recruiter has more power. Not true in this case. They both do equally bad off if they don't reach a deal. But that happens in real life, depending on where you are in the food chain, right? Sometimes the recruiter has more power, sometimes the candidate has more power, sometimes perhaps they have the same amount of power. And potentially you could get the same amount of points. So this case is designed so we can compare the outcome of one with the outcome of the other and see which one negotiated better. So my first suggestion is we're going to cover all the best practices to create value, or at least the most important ones. I want you to pay attention and really be critical and try to think, which of these best practices that I'm going to go over did I not use? Because that's probably why you left value on the table, if you left value on the table. Then we're going to look at the second mistake, settling for too little. Clearly, since there is a balance of power, why does this recruiter get less points than the candidate? Dramatically less. 500 against 8,500. There's no reason for that. The structure doesn't explain that one party did a lot better off than the other. It means that for some reason the candidate here negotiated much better than the recruiter. Yes, Pete.
Probably because there was a misunderstanding of that.
Not for these people.
Well,
Maybe for.
Well, because what I would say is our outcome was. Like,
This is not you, by the way.
No, I know.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, my outcome was lopsided. Candidate won, the recruiter lost, because I was willing to go with no job, and the recruiter wasn't.
Okay.
So it was a misunderstanding. There might have been
A misunderstanding. You were not clearly following the mandate, because your mandate is maximize points, right? That's the idea of the point system. Is I don't have maybe I'm not saying to you. I maybe not have the time to explain to you, recruiter, what I need, but follow this point system. That's what of course, these people who were negotiating the free trade agreement understood, but the risk of just letting them have the criteria to decide on the trade-off was too high. So we gave them a point system so they knew how they were maximizing value, because we could not be in 24 negotiation tables at the same time. That was the point. Yes,
Although,
Tim.
to Pete's defense.
To Pete's defense, Pete, I don't think Pete needs help.
No,
He does very well on his own.
as the candidate,
Yeah.
he captured a lot of value and did better than his BATA. It just wasn't, it was lopsided, but he maximized his points. If their scores were similar to number 4 there, the candidate in number 4 did pretty well.
The candidate number 4 did very well. The interesting thing is there probably was a deal in which they both could have done better. So he still left value on the table.
Left value on the table, but
No, they did very well, but still did not optimize the deal. They could have done better, even better. He could have done even better without making the other party worse. That's why you cannot happen in negotiation, because you're destroying value. Okay, so what I will suggest for those of you who were lopsided is try to figure out which of the best practices to claim value you're not using. So for creating value, which of those best practices that I'm going to list for creating value you're not using? And for those who are lopsided, which of those best practices for claiming value you're not using? And you'll see that is pretty obvious. Then the other 2 errors are more dramatic, is not negotiating with reaching a deal would have been better. It doesn't make sense to not reach a deal in this case, because the worst one did 500 points, and that's better than 0. Unless you have an ego problem, you're better with 500 than with 0. Does that make sense? Okay. And finally, and this maybe is the person didn't do the math well, minus 3,300 points. Why would I accept something worse than my BADNA? My BADNA is 0. And this happens very often because the person doesn't think about the BADNA. They think, I need to close the deal. No, you don't need to close the deal. You close the deal, you don't need a job if the job they're offering you is worse than what you get where you are or somewhere else, which is 0. Okay? So far, so good? You're thinking, Pete.
Well, it's just that it's,
Making a lot of noise in your brain.
no, I was just thinking that that's the, like almost the only scenario where the candidate made less, like substantially less. It was either almost.
That's because the candidate accepted something, a negative value. This deal destroys value for the candidate. The candidate? Yes, the candidate. They shouldn't have accepted this deal. They're better off with 0.
Right. No, I was just noticing that all the values, the candidate comes out almost at par or much better.
That's accidental. I mean, this is because I took a set of data. More often is the recruiter that does better, because somehow the paradigm is the recruiter always has more power, which is not necessarily true. Yeah, this is just an accident, but yeah, maybe I should choose a different set of data. Okay, but the 4 errors are clear, right? Leaving value on the table, selling for too little, not closing a deal when closing a deal would have been better, and accepting something worse than my partner. And this happens in real life. Okay, so approaches to negotiation. Let me see if I can do this. Okay, this is your schedule for both parties. And here we can see what we call issues. This is what the building blocks of any negotiation are, the issues we will negotiate, and there were 8 issues here. This is what we call options, which is within each issue, we gave you 5 options, sort of artificial. In life, you would have a lot more, but this is to make it viable. And these are the points that you would get depending on the option that was chosen. And you wanted to maximize points. That was because points are simply a way, the best way we can use to reflect value. Yeah, we use a point system in our life, which is money. This is a different point system. Does that make sense? Typically, how does a negotiation like this happen when people don't have a lot of experience? Or in real life, when we do deals, sometimes our only focus is money. We focus on money. Either we only focus on money or we focus on money first. For this negotiation, what would have happened if the only issue would have been salary? No deal. Because if I get 0 points, which is my BADNA, you get minus 6,000. You couldn't have reached a deal if the only issue would have been salary. So think about it, because this is very powerful. What made it viable to reach a deal? The fact that you had 7 other issues. Adding issues is the best practice in negotiation. And is counterintuitive because either sometimes people say, let's settle salary and we look at other things later, or they don't even think about other issues. Case in point. We have this expression in Colombia, I'm sure you have something similar in Canada, which is nobody is a prophet in its own land. So in my family, when they have negotiations, nobody calls me. They always do their negotiations on their own. But one time my sister, who's an academic, she's a professor, she was moving from England to the US, to Miami. She married an Englishman, and they were offered a job, both of them, at Miami University. And she called me because the dean had talked to her and basically had conveyed that the salary structure was extremely strict in academia. I mean, there were some criteria and not much movement, which meant she would have to accept a salary lower than when they lived in England, and they lived at Oxford. But she needed that job. Her banda was no job. So she needed the job. So she said, what do I do? Well, I don't think you can do anything. This is a very standard salary structure. They're not going to pay you more. But let me ask you something. What other things are important to you? She said, what do you mean? I need to resolve the salary issue. I don't know, other things, I haven't thought about it. Well, are there other things that are important to you? Well, now that you ask me, yes, I'm in a tenure track. You know what tenure track is, right? I'm in tenure track, so I need to do a lot of research. I need to publish to eventually get my tenure. So having a nice budget for research would be nice. Oh, okay, so one issue that's important to you is your research budget. So she began to understand, and she said, what else is important? No? Well, actually, the office. What do you mean? Well, there's two buildings. The old building where the dinosaurs are, and the new building where the dean is and with all the star professors are. I want an office in the new building. Okay, so office space is another issue. What else? Well, now that you got me thinking, Miami is a car city. You have to drive everywhere. And every morning when I get to school, I have found, just by visiting, that sometimes there's no parking spot. I have to park like 3 parking lots away, and especially when it rains, that's a hell of a walk. So I want an assigned parking spot next to the building. Okay, now she got excited. And my computer is old. I would like a new computer. Okay, and I want to use the pool of secretaries like other people can. Okay, so she said, oh, now I understand. I said, okay, tell me. Well, I'm going to call the dean, or I'm going to meet with the dean tomorrow. I'm going to accept the salary he's offering, and I'm going to ask these other issues. And she said, you didn't understand anything. That's not the way you do it. Now at least we have more issues, which put more value on the table. But what you need to do is you go and ask for the salary you wanted and these other issues, and the dean we know is going to say no to the salary. And then what are you going to do? Well, reluctantly, I could go down on salary if you guarantee these other issues. You trade off, and you trade off in real time. Some people accept the salary with the hope that that will create goodwill and then negotiate the other issues. They lost their leverage. They gave up their bargaining chip. Does that make sense? So you want to trade off, and that means you don't want to negotiate sequentially. You want to negotiate the full package. In very complex deals, there's an expression which is nothing is agreed to until everything is agreed to. That for example, is typical in peace processes, in free trade agreements, because you need to manage your trade-offs. If you agree on salary, you lost the bargaining chip that you need in order to get the other stuff you want to get. Does that make sense? So what do we learn? What did we learn? We want to add issues in negotiation, and good negotiators are obsessive with this. What issues can I put on the table that are very valuable to my counterpart and not costly to me? And what issues are very valuable to me and not costly to my counterpart? Because negotiation is quite a bit about trade-offs. Does that make sense? Yes, Pete.
When you're doing this, in this scenario, you say salary is important. This is what I want. The person says, I can't give that to you. He says, well, the next step would then be, well, I can maybe move on salary, but I want this. These are the other things. Like, I won't accept. How do you move on? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah.
So you can't agree to 7 things at the same time. You kind of have to agree. Like, well, I'm open to this, but I need this and this and this. Well, I agree to those things, but they go not to this, and then you go back to this.
I'll give you. Let me move forward a little bit, and I'll tell you the technique. Okay, but that's a very important question because you're right. It sounds complicated the way you're saying, doing it the way you're saying it's hard to do. It's hard to do. So let me show you a couple of ideas. Okay. Okay. So far this is good, right? This is what happens when you negotiate sequentially. Somebody says 10%. Of course, because that was your extreme offer, and the other party offers 2, and you end up at 6, or somewhere 6 or 8 or 4, somewhere in the middle. Then you move to the next one, and you say division A, and hopefully you agree to division A because you both want division A. Very exotic. People sometimes don't get to division A, and there's 2 reasons for that. We are so competitive that we assume that because I want division A, they must want division E. And to not be too greedy, we propose division B. Nobody checks, and they end up in division B. Or they get very shrewd and they say, oh, they want division A. I'm going to pretend that I want division E, and I'm going to ask for concessions. And maybe you get a couple of concessions, and eventually they don't give you more concessions. You are around division C. And then you cannot go back and say, no, I was lying. I really wanted division A since the beginning, so let's move to division A. There's better way to leverage compatible issues. Of course, then here they will say 25.5 and they go 15. June 1, August 1st, they end up July 1. Then they go 160, they end up in 80. Plan A, Plan E, they end up in C. 90 and 82, they end up in 86, somewhere in the middle, of course, and hopefully they agree to San Francisco. If you notice, this ends up in 8,800 points. Why? Because you impeded the trade-offs by negotiating sequentially. So you don't want to negotiate sequentially because you will impede the potential trade-offs. Does that make sense? So what is the best practice? Well, we know some best practices. You mentioned it just now. Share information. Negotiate the information. Okay, I'm the recruiter. The most important issue for me is salary. What about you? Oh, salary, that makes sense. Then my second most important issue is vacation time. What about you? Bonus, I understand now. And so on and so forth. I negotiate with the information. We spent like 4 meetings with the US doing this. At the beginning, they were frustrated because they wanted to reach agreements. But those early agreements would have been non-beneficial to us because they had anchored the negotiation, so it would have been based on their offer. And agreeing too early impedes the trade-offs. You don't find the trade-offs. Then I need to understand the preferences, which is, what would you prefer? And this is the preferences. I would prefer a higher bonus. You prefer a lower bonus. So now I understand 2 things which are fundamental in negotiation. What are their preferences? What are their priorities? Or what are their priorities? What are their preferences? Here you did not have too much information about interest. That was on purpose because we wanted to show you, the case wants to show you that if you understand priorities and preferences, you're in pretty good shape to negotiate because you can find the trade-offs. Does that make sense? Of course, if you understand the interest even better, if you realize that this guy is a foodie and he wants to go to San Francisco because he loves food in San Francisco, then you know that his preference is San Francisco, or his girlfriend is in San Francisco, or the boyfriend is in San Francisco, whatever. Interest gives you a lot of information about preferences and priorities and help you find the trade-offs. But this is the information you need to exchange. Making sense up to here? What is this useful for? Well, this is what we call a trade-off issue. Why? because it is priority number 5 for me, and it's priority number 2 for you. It's a lot more important to you than it is to me. So it doesn't make sense to agree to something in the middle when I can trade this off for something more important. Then this one is compatible because we both want the same thing. Here, we job assignment, we want the same thing, so it's a compatible issue. This is what we call another trade-off issue because it's here 2 and 5, so we call it a trade-off issue. This is what we call a confrontational issue or a contentious issue because we have the same priority and we want to oppose things. And this again is a trade-off issue because priority 7 to me, priority only 3 to you. A very important, I'm sorry, it's a very low priority to me, very high priority to you. This is another trade-off issue because it's priority 3 to me and 7 to you. And this is a very contentious issue because it's priority number 1 and we want to oppose things. And this is a compatible issue because we both want the same thing. Now we know how to negotiate. In theory, because that goes back to Pete's question, we should agree on this one. We both want the same thing. We should agree on this one because we both want the same thing. We should trade off somehow this issue for this issue. Maybe I'm skilled and I manage my 10% and I only give you 10 days here, but I'm assuming that they're both very effective negotiators. So they say, if you want the 10%, I want my 5 days. If not, no way. Then I can go here and propose 100% in exchange of plan E. And probably in the other issues, we'll find somewhere in the middle. So perhaps July 1st and perhaps 86. And now we have 100% of the value. Does that make sense? But you see how important it is to do this systematically. If I don't understand the priorities of both parties, the preferences of both parties, the trade-offs are hard to find. Yes, Pete.
Can you introduce new categories?
New issues? All the time.
As you're going through.
Yeah.
So you
Oh, yeah.
start off with 6.
Yeah.
And then as you're negotiating, you realize that something else is important.
Yeah.
It raises an issue and say, okay, so where do you take a step back and go, okay, both parties decide how important it is and where it fits, or do you just kind of put that aside?
Well, that's the idea of nothing is agreed to until everything is agreed to, because maybe there's a few more advanced techniques to find asymmetric priorities. One is unbundling issues. The orange is an example. Instead of talking about the orange, let's unbundle the orange into peel and pulp because we prioritize it differently. So let's not negotiate the orange, let's negotiate the unbundled issue because the orange is composed of peel and pulp and we prioritize it differently, so there's a potential trade-offs. You look, for example, for difference in resources and capabilities. I have resources and capabilities you don't have, and you have resources and capabilities I don't have. Preferences in time. I need money now because I have a cash flow problem. You have no problem with money later because your cash flow, you're bigger than me and you have a lower cost of money than I do. Risk preferences. Expectations. There's a lot of techniques that allow you to find new issues. But you're always looking for new issues. Yeah. Okay. Oh, this is you. Okay. So what do we see? Apparently, all of you left quite a bit of value on the table. You didn't find all the trade-off, or you did something strange with the compatible issues, but it doesn't seem that you capture all the potential value that was on the 13,200 points that were on the table. For some reason, and this is not what happens speed all the time, the candidate did a lot better in group 2, 3, 5, and at least 8 than the recruiter. The recruiter, for some reason settle for too little. There's no reason for that. And then here, maybe the recruiter did it a little bit better than the candidate. Here, the candidate did a little bit better than the recruiter, but they both left a lot of value on the table. And group 1 and group 4 did not reach an agreement?
We did, but it wasn't captured here.
Okay, I'll make sure that it's, I'll check it. Maybe she hasn't finished, but group 1, did you reach an agreement?
I think we lost group 1.
Oh, that's true. We lost group 1. So I'll make sure that I'll check what happened to group 4. Fair enough. Okay. So what's important here? That I'm gonna go through the best practices to create value now, and I'm gonna go through the best practices to claim value. So once again, try to write down those best practices you're not using. So let's begin. Best practices in negotiation. There is best practices to create value and best practices to claim value. Best practices to create value is about making the pie bigger. So the first one, you know already. You need to work on building trust. That's a fundamental best practice. Did I build enough trust? The difference is huge. Remember the bike example if you don't remember anything else. I mean, people are willing to do things for you that are amazing when they trust you. People care about relationships. When they trust you, they want you to do well. They value the relationship long term. One of the techniques that you use that comes from game theory is increase the shadow of the long term. Make your counterpart see that the long term is important. Axelrod, now I remember the guy. Axelrod is the game theories that talks about the prisoner's dilemma, and one of the ways to promote collaboration is to enhance the shadow of the long term. Show your counterpart how important the relationship is long term. Exchange information, and now you know about interest, about priorities, about preferences. Yes, there is a risk, but now we know that the cost of not sharing information is much higher than the risk of sharing information. Research shows that people who share a lot of information as negotiators in their negotiation life accumulate more value than people who do not share information systematically. Negotiate the information. You will deal with people who are not really open to share information, so negotiate it. This is priority 1 for me. Tell me what priority 1 for you is. I prefer this. What would you prefer? These are my interests. What are your interests? Negotiate the information. Yes, Pete.
I don't mean to make it a two-way conversation.
No.
But
You ask good questions.
with negotiating information is a way to encourage participation, to share your perspective. So let's say I tell you what's important to me, but you're hesitant to share what's important to you. If I say, well, okay, I understand, I'm going to assume that based on my business experience, that this other item is probably important to you. So that's what's in my head. So I'm going to be transparent.
That's a good way.
I'm going to tell you what I think.
Yeah.
If you're not going to tell me, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to put something in that place anyways.
So let me tell you my experience. When you do a good job building trust, usually sharing information flows easily. It's rare that once you do a really good job building trust, especially if you use the negotiation information technique of, let me tell you, Pete, these are my interests. Could you tell me yours? The reciprocity bias is very powerful. Again, when we do the morning case, I often record the case in audio, and I have you listen to the case afterwards. And it's amazing how you discover that when you justify, they justify. When you threaten, they threaten. People are really good at reciprocating bad behavior. But they also reciprocate good behavior. When you build trust, the other party reciprocates building trust. When you exchange information, the other party reciprocates exchanging information. So you have a lot more control over that than one thinks. But of course, there's the exception, for cultural reasons, for whatever reason. So negotiating the information is a good first step. And that may not work. So you may do what you said. Okay, I think this is the most important for you. Is it? They may correct you, they may not correct you. So that works or doesn't work. And then at the end, you have what I'm going to show you at the end, which is Mesos. Mesos is a very powerful tool to find out about the other party's interests, preferences, and priorities and preferences, even if they're not so open to telling you. And I'll show you why in a moment. But doing this systematically is fundamental. So those metrics, those process metrics is, tell me, negotiator, did you find out about the other party's interest? No, I didn't. Okay, you're going to leave value on the table. Did you know what their priorities are? You're going to leave value on the table. Did you find out the preferences? You're going to leave value on the table. Did you build trust? You're going to leave value on the table, right? Then you want to find how to add issues. The overall technique is find issues with different priorities. There is in our database, there is an article on leveraging, on advanced techniques to value creation, which show you more precise list of how to build issues with different priorities. I don't go into that because it will take a longer time. Compatible issues, of course, is really useful. Then you want to negotiate in packages, not sequentially. You saw what happens when you negotiate sequentially. You end up killing the trade-offs. Does that make sense? And you want to use Mesos. And I've been talking about Mesos since this morning. This is the technique that was developed at Kellogg by a lady called Victoria Medvec. At least she coined the technique. She documented the technique. Mesos means multiple, 3, equivalent, I don't care which one you choose, they're all the same to me. Simultaneous, you present them at the same time. You don't say, do you like this? No. Then, would you like this? No. Then, would you like this? No. You said, you can choose between A, B, or C. Offers. It's tentative. We are negotiating. What are the advantages of Mesos? And I'll show you how I would have built the Mesos for this case. It forces you to be more creative. Because if you propose one offer, you probably do whatever you always do. When you have your team have to work on 3 offers, first they need to understand both parties' interests, priorities, and preferences much better. If not, they're not going to make it. And they will have to be creative about different mixes, different trade-offs. And you want to optimize the outcome, so you want to evaluate different trade-offs. It increases trust in your counterpart for the simple reason that people like choices. When you allow people to choose A, B, or C, you're giving people choices, and people like choices. They value choices. Also, you can anchor more aggressively because of this. So you can do a more aggressive anchoring because you're giving them choices. Whether the choices are not great, that's another story, but just the fact of giving them choices is a good start. And finally, it helps you, observing their reactions, it helps you to fine-tune your understanding of their interests, priorities, and preferences, because they say, I don't like this. Why don't you like this? Oh, I like this better. Why do you like this better? So it's an extremely powerful technique. And I was thinking that, I forgot your name, Joan. This is something you can think about for your question. Okay. Then best practice is to claim value. And this is, I love this question. How many of you set yourself a target for this case? I told you, you need to set yourself a target. If not, you're going to concentrate on your reservation point. Whatever target you chose, it says, I'm going to try to get 7,000 points. That's a very different mindset from, I'm going to try to get more than 0. Your reservation point is 0. So if you're focusing on getting something more than 0, 300 sounds great. So you need to set yourself a target. So how many of you set yourself a target? You know the answer. How many of you made the first offer? I know you still are not convinced about the first offer. There is some 20 articles on the program on negotiation about the importance of making the first offer. You have a great advantage, especially with multiple issues. Making the first offer becomes more important because you anchor your negotiation at a place which puts you in an advantage if you have a good target. So if my target is 7,000, my first offer should have been 10,000. Does that make sense? If you were not able to make an offer, you need to make a counter offer. And by the way, I'll go back to a question that Pete asked before, based on my target. And the way I start managing trade-offs is I present full packages. So, here are my 3 full packages. You don't like them, so let me go back, think, and now I found more intelligent trade-offs. So these are new packages. So one way to deal with what you were concerned about is you present the packages. You negotiate in packages. This one is great. And this is another one that I see people not use. If you're going to give them full coverage of moving expensive because it's priority 7 and you don't care and you want to build goodwill, do so, but ask for something in exchange. One mistake people make very often is they make concessions because they're not important to them, because they don't pay attention to the concession or because they have this idea that they will create goodwill with the concession. No, in negotiation, the golden rule is trade-offs. If I have a bargaining chip, which is something that doesn't cost me anything, but is extremely valuable for you, use it to get something for you. Don't give it up. That's why we call them bargaining chips. Of course, do not share information with your counterpart, your agent, or your team about your reservation point, your urgency, or the bad consequences of your BATNA. This is the information you keep secret. Even from your team, because if you make your team focus on your weaknesses, you will shift your team to your reservation point. Increase negotiation power, hopefully, by improving your BATNA. So, for example, with my MBA students, when I used to teach the MBA, not the executive MBA, I always taught the last semester. And they were so cute. They came to me and said, "Professor, I need your help with this negotiation. I would love to work for Scotiabank. That's my preferred employer. And let me tell you, I did a really good job, Professor. My first interview is with Scotiabank." I said, "No, you didn't do a very good job. Go find an offer from 2 more banks and leave the last interview with Scotiabank so you have a BATNA. Because if your first interview is with Scotiabank, you have no BATNA." And of course, making our counterpart BATNA less attractive. I gave you the example of the M&As when they ask for exclusivity. That's a way to make the BATNA less attractive. This is when you're negotiating with polychronic cultures or high context cultures. Usually in those cultures, hierarchy is very important. Definitely in Japan, definitely in Latin America. You don't want to send a junior negotiator to negotiate with a senior negotiator. First, because they may be offended. But second, because the senior will treat the junior as if they had less power, whether they do or not. And they will force more concessions because they think that the status gives them the right to get more concessions. So choose the right status in hierarchical cultures. Prepare well and show security and confidence. We know that psychologically when you come up to the table and you're confident because you have prepared very well, your counterpart reads that as, "Oh, they must have a good BATNA," whether they do or not. Very important, and I haven't emphasized this enough, but use objective standards to defend your offers, your targets. So, my sister could have said, "Well, a person like me with my experience in the market makes so much," like here. That's more convincing than simply, "I want $90,000. No, I want $90,000 because that's the market value of a person like me. That's much more persuasive than simply asking for that. Okay, did you pay attention to which best practices you're not using? So let me ask you, which best practices you're not using?
Giving away stuff for free.
That's a big one. People do that a lot. Make concessions because they're not expensive to me. What else? Set yourself a target. That's essential too. If not, you will be biased by your reservation point. What else?
Also lowering the other party's bet.
Assessing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or trying to lower it.
Trying to make it, yeah, less attractive. That has.
Sometimes you don't have control over that.
No, sometimes you don't, and sometimes it is not ethical, right? So, for example, going behind your negotiator's back because you have another person in that organization that you know you can convince easier, that's not a good idea. So that's a trick about making the other party's BATNA less attractive. That said, there's legitimate ways, like the exclusivity example. Also making the BATNA less attractive is that sometimes my counterpart did not assess their BATNA well, and they think they have a better BATNA than they do. So my job is to show them that their BATNA is not so good. The beverage company thought they had a better BATNA, and once we said, okay, what about transportation costs? What about qualification costs and logistic? And what about knowing that they're going to price the bottles much higher than we? That was a technique that you have to be very careful with because they might be offended, right? So it's tricky, but very useful. What else?
Holding information or
Sharing information, critical. What are my interests? What are your interests? What are my priorities? What are your priorities? What are my preferences? What are your preferences? Yes?
In the same vein, I think it's assuming their priorities.
Yeah.
Because, thinking that they're not going to be forthcoming with what the priorities are. So maybe.
I'll give you a technique just in a moment, so you don't have to do that in the wrong way. You can do it the right way. How many of you negotiated sequentially? Yeah. You see that doesn't work. That's not a good practice. Yes, you're thinking.
Yeah, because not everything has the same weight.
Yeah. So when you negotiate sequentially, you're not looking for the trade-offs. Everybody's going to try to get the best possible agreement on every issue.
It's more like small packages of things.
That's still tricky. Even small packages can be tricky because you may not find the right trade-offs. So that's why I like to look at the whole package.
Even though all those variables don't have the same weight. It would be
Yeah.
3 variables that have 99% of the weight, and then the remaining 20 are
Yeah, exactly. I'll show you in a moment. But okay, any other best practices that you want to work on?
I just do want to say, though, that I feel sometimes people do take on the tactic of negotiating sequentially so that they can negotiate you down.
Yeah.
So that is something that.
Don't let them do that.
If you're not in a position of power, you have to push back against.
Yeah.
It can be very tricky.
That's a good point.
Depending on the
Yeah.
power dynamic, to set yes, that sounds good, but we also have to take a look at these 7 additional
Yeah.
items. We agree in theory, but we still need these 7 other items.
Agreeing in theory is risky because once you agree in theory, going back is not easy. That's why the package system is better.
But what
Just say,
happens
let's put a pin in that and move on? Is that what you're saying?
But sometimes, in the free trade agreement, we sometimes had to do it because of the complexity. So we said, well, tentatively, I could accept this. And then later I said, remember that I said tentatively? No, you agree on that. So it's tricky.
Yeah.
That's why it's better to do the packages. And in the free trade agreement, we ended up doing a lot of packages back and forth. And the packages changed. Yeah. So, which brings me, if you want, so we jump to this, and because I think this will clear a lot of your ideas, mesos. So this is a meso from the recruiter's perspective. If you see, they're pretty much equivalent. I couldn't make them exactly equivalent, but they're 10,600, 10,500, 10,400. So my target maybe was 8,000, and I gave myself some room. So multiple is 1, 2, 3. 2 doesn't work so well. 4 gets too complicated. 3 seems to be the magical number that the experts suggest. Equivalent I don't care which one you choose, I get the same value. Simultaneous, I present them to you at the same time because I want to create that choice. I want to create that possibility of you choosing. I want to make you feel that you have a choice. Does that make sense? So what happens here? I present this. I don't know what the value is for the candidate because I don't have their point system and they're not going to tell me and they shouldn't tell me. One thing is priorities and preferences. The other thing is points because points really give me an idea. Oh, wow, this issue is worth everything. So as long as I give them this issue, I can get everything else. That's not good. And you can see that, I present the offers. If the candidate is not very well prepared, that already looks good because it's better than their BATNA. But if they're well prepared and they have a target, this is not good. So I say, okay, what do you think about my offers? Well, I don't like them. Can you tell me a little bit more? Tell me why. Well, the salary, that's really low. Vacation time, I don't really care about vacation time, so I could live with that. Insurance, I'm young and healthy, so plenty for now could serve me well. Job assignment, actually I prefer Division A if possible. Division B, not so good. Division C, so I already know we have a compatible issue here. Starting date, oh boy, yeah, I'm sort of cash tight. Starting in August is not great for me. I just graduated and I have a lot of student loans. Now they can start telling me about their interest. Bonus, this is what I would like, and this is important because I think I can do a really good job, and bonus would help. Chicago, I would prefer San Francisco. Now I know we're compatible again. And moving expenses, look, this is really important to me. I'm really cash tight, and I need to improve my cash flow. If not, I'm going to be in trouble. So 100% is important. What has he told me or she told me? Preferences, interests, priorities. I know a lot more now. And I can already improve the agreement by agreeing on Division A here and on San Francisco here because now I realize they're compatible. Very important. Look at that. I didn't move here, 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 and here. Why? No movement here, no movement, oh no, I'm sorry, no movement here, no movement here, no movement here, no movement here. Because these are my highest priorities, and I want to signal that I have no flexibility on those. So I anchor those in a way that I'm showing I can't move here. I can move in other stuff, but not there. Does that make sense?
You do have flexibility because the range for the salary went all the way up to 90. Wow.
Well, but this is my most important issue. So I want to anchor this where I do best because this is the issue priority number one for me. So I'm showing I have flexibility, but I'm saying not much flexibility here because these are the issues that give me the most points. So I'm anchoring those issues aggressively. The other way around is if we did it the other way, it would look something like this. The candidate would anchor this issue, this issue, this issue, and this issue, which are very important, and show flexibility in the others. Yeah.
So why didn't you, as a candidate, why wouldn't you make an offer above the 90, above the 10?
Oh, just for academic reasons. We needed to limit the number of options. So the case was something you could negotiate here, and not you start inventing stuff. That was to limit your creativity. Does that make sense? Yes.
You've already done like proper exchange of information, negotiating packages, know what you have and what. Why don't we just end up with offer one anyway? You don't need to present three offers. You already know what the other party is. You already know what's important.
Okay.
I've never seen a situation in real life at all where we give it three offers.
No, this is a very sophisticated technique.
I've never, ever.
Okay, good. So now you have a technique that a lot of people don't know. So let me tell you a story.
It kind of irritates the other guy.
It doesn't. Let me tell you a story, real story. For some reason, we ended up helping ExxonMobil. The year they merged, remember the ExxonMobil and Mobil merged, right? In their negotiation with the union. Yeah, and the union wasn't one union. It was two unions, one from Exxon, one from Mobile, that also merged. So what they wanted is to take all the benefits they had at Exxon and add up all the benefits they got in Mobile. So in Colombia, by law, the union makes the first offer. There's a legal reason, but it is called question. There's the legal term, I don't know how to translate it, but it's basically questioning the existing agreement. So the way you start a negotiation is they present a new proposal, which kicks off the negotiation. And it has to be the union who does that. So of course what we got was these outrageous requests that were basically in the moon, right? How would the company would have responded? Normally, they would have gone to the bottom of the ocean and said, well, this is our offer. And we would have taken a year to negotiate that. So instead of that, we said, why don't we try mesos? All your questions and mesos and what does that mean, and that's complicated and all that. So we presented 3 offers. The first package, we gave them some stuff. We asked for stuff in exchange because we wanted to reduce some of the benefits because they were completely outrageous. In the second package, we did a different mix. We gave them some different stuff and we asked for things in exchange. And in the third package, they knew they would not get what they were asking for. But with a counter offer very aggressive, it would have been, and especially sequentially, we would have taken forever and we would have, we wouldn't have found the trade-off at least so easily. The fact we presented the 3 offers sent the message, oh, management is reasonable. They're willing to negotiate. Look, they're giving us some stuff because they knew that they were not going to get everything. So we signal a willingness to negotiate and we de-escalate the dynamics. Because the dynamics would have been, I am over there and you are over there. We both are sort of offended with each other's offer. And we would have also give them arguments. Oh, you see what management offers? They're horrible. Here we are saying, oh, we can offer stuff. Yeah.
That scenario happens though when you don't collect information before you make the offer. Because I was thinking about what I think it's what Ahmed was saying about you would never make more than one offer. But in information collecting, you might ask, well, what's more important? Cash now, cash later. What's more important, upfronts or royalties, if you're negotiating a business contract. And so as you collect information, they're like they're not a formal offer, but you're putting out vessels, you're just sort of presenting ideas as you collect information. You're saying, as I present the idea, these things could work for me, right? Could they work for you? Well, that in a way is a mess up, right? Because
in a way, and that's a technique. That's one technique. That one technique we say, I'm willing. I want. You want this? Okay, I'm willing to give you this if you give me this. Okay, and then they respond, okay, I'm willing to give you this if you give me this and this. Well, and then I want this. That's one way. I think it's less powerful than this. This is extremely powerful. There is a risk, and let me tell you another story. We use mesos a lot in the free trade agreement when we had really tough negotiators on the other side that they wanted everything. They were not saying they wanted everything basically. And I remember one in particular. I still remember her name to this day. She was so tough. It was Mary Latimer. It was her name, and she was in charge of the agricultural table. And she was great in the sense that we presented mesos to her, and what she would do is we say, oh, okay, I want this from this one, I want this from this one, and I want this from this one. It's called cherry picking. So I say, Mary, oh, come on, you're a savvy negotiator. You know that doesn't work that way. If you want this, I cannot give you this. That's one thing. But even then, it created the dynamics of this is about trade-offs, man. You want more of this, and I can give you. I have to give you less of this. So it from the beginning, it creates a trade-off conversation, which is really good for negotiation. And when you're negotiating with people who are not so sophisticated with trade-offs, This educates them because they have to go back home and they have to ask their boss, or it says, what does she say, my boss? Well, no, she says, oh, you could get that or that. Another example, 2 more examples. One of the really difficult negotiations is retail. You know that, because they're, especially Walmart, they're really tough. And sometimes the gatekeeper doesn't let me be creative because the gatekeeper wants everything. And so what we do is, in order to bypass the gatekeeper, we say, look, we understand what you're saying. This is what we can do. Oh, but this doesn't work. Go ask your boss to see what they think. And sometimes, very often, they get back to us and say, okay, actually, number 3 is something we can work with, but we want this and this and that, okay? So that's another technique. The other one is highlighting added value. We were helping a company improve their B2C B2C and B2B negotiations in the security systems. They were playing high-end security, and the incumbent was sort of a basic security provider. And they thought, if we provide high-end, we can be competitive. The problem is the customers did not understand what a high-end security system was. So they were systematically losing the deals against the basic provider because the customer did not understand the added value. So we started presenting 3 offers. One that was competitive against the basic incumbent, even a little bit cheaper, a better one, and a much better one. And the customers started asking, oh, okay, why is this more expensive? Well, because you get this and that. Oh, okay, I want this and that and that. I didn't realize I wanted. So it's also a way to get away from price to added value, or to link price to added value. So there's a lot of benefits to this. I know it's complex. Once you start using it, you'll like it. And once you start using it, you learn how to use it. At the beginning, it's not easy to do this. Yes, Tim.
I have tried this. I have found that in the types of negotiations that
you do
are doing, it gets too complicated for the people that we're negotiating with to explain to their management and their management's management, and too much gets lost in translation, and it winds up being ineffective.
Okay.
However, if you try a similar approach and boil it down to fewer issues, and you actually have a discussion and do that, and don't get it in the paperwork that then they have to go take up, you can actually get a lot of information shared and revealed
At the table level.
At the table level that is otherwise very hard to get at, but in the context of, we're going to put together jointly an offer that you can take back, but
let's fine tune it here.
And fine tune it here, and you can approach some of the same things and get into that.
Okay.
Nobody here, I'm not accusing anybody here of this, but sometimes the counterparties just don't have that ability to translate.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to look at your concrete experiences, but one thing that I've learned also, and this is not something I learned, the theory says, is don't vary too many issues. Vary a few. If you vary too many, it's confusing for the other party. So vary a few and start playing with a few. So that's easier to convey. So maybe that helps. How are we doing?
I would just only add to this is that sometimes if you have a laundry list of things that are important, there's different decision makers for each item.
Okay.
So that's also hard, because if you're showing payment terms versus, how you're going to resource the model versus, they're all different things that are important to different people. So each decision maker is going to be like, yes, I'd like that, because it's very, very hard to have and usually the person that you're dealing with that's negotiating is broad in terms of their knowledge and not empowered to make those decisions.
Okay.
So
And then
that's the cherry picking, because you meet with one person, you may say yes, and then you need to go on to another business item with a different business team. So it becomes difficult to have that.
Yes and no, in the sense that the difficulty will be there anyway, in the sense that you have inside your organization and in their organization siloed decision makers. And you're going to have to deal with them anyway, in the sense that if the finance guy on the other side doesn't want to improve payment terms against price, you're going to have that conversation if you want to get that. So using packages, not even mesos, packages, forces that conversation on the other side. Because otherwise you're giving up the conversation, you're giving up the trade-off. You have to find it somewhere. And the best way to find it, in my experience, is with the packages. Because otherwise you're going to have to talk to the financial guy, then to the operational guy, and you have the same difficulty. Yeah.
I just have a question.
Jonathan, don't speak to me in Swedish.
No, I'll try. I just have a general question. So when I did my MBA, I had a lot of discussions about when to involve the lawyers. Like you've done several different negotiations at different stages. I was trained to involve the lawyers as early as possible to solve issues early on, but it's also a costly thing for some smaller companies to have a high lawyer fee running retainer. So what's your experience? Or, like, for example, in our industry, it would be good to have them when they have the non-binding term sheets, send to them together with lawyers. When do you normally involve lawyers?
Well, I mean, first thing, there's different situations. I mean, I had left, I'd never gotten to tell my lawyer jokes, but lawyers are trained to negotiate, I'm not saying all of them, but they're trained to negotiate based on justifications and threats, if you want, based on rights and power. So sometimes bringing them down to interest is not easy, but it's feasible. In my experience, you consult lawyers probably during the negotiation process because there's legal things you need to understand whether you can involve them or not. For example, in labor negotiations, there's a lot of legal aspects that you need to understand. And we involve them at the end to fine-tune the agreement. But I mean, I don't know how you avoid using them or you avoid the pricing, because if you need them, you need them, right? Yeah. It depends. I try to involve them early on, for example, labor negotiations, but first putting together two consultants is always tricky because both consultants want to do things their way. So the labor lawyers want to negotiate the way they negotiate, and I want to negotiate the way I believe I want to negotiate. That's already. So what I try to do, for example, in labor negotiations and the free trade agreement, is to involve them in the training, in the negotiation training, before we engage in the process, so they understand the dynamic we're proposing. Does that make sense? I mean, even what we do, something which is pretty amazing sometimes, is if we manage to have a training where we involve the union and management in the same workshop, that helps a lot afterwards in the negotiation process. So there's a lot of paradigms here. I mean, you saw we're proposing a lot of paradigm shifts here. Things that are really counterintuitive. Just the fact that you want to negotiate sequentially because you want to have control of the issues. So you don't want to, this thing about the whole package gets confusing. So it's much more orderly if you negotiate issue by issue, right? That's probably how a lot of lawyers will approach the negotiation. They look sequentially to the contract. So bringing them to the package negotiation is not always easy. That's some of the wisdom I can give you about lawyers. Okay. What are your biggest takeaways from the day? Don't leave value on the table. That's a good takeaway. Share information. Good for you. What else? What other takeaways do you? Select the target. Yeah? Make the first offer.
Don't let your reservation point
Don't let the reservation point bias you. Work on your BADNA. Know your BADNA, improve your BADNA, make their BADNA less attractive, assess the balance of power by understanding both parties' BADNAs.
But for deals in pharmaceuticals, sometimes partner is no deal. In generics, I can have several suppliers of
Yeah.
the same product, but in specialties,
They were explaining that to me, that in specialties,
zero or one.
yeah, your BADNA is not great. Then you have to use the other techniques, the tactical part of the table and the value creation part. That's what I like about the three approaches. If I don't have sufficient leverage strategically, can I compensate with value? Can I compensate with tactics? What are the takeaways? If you're going to make a concession, ask for a concession. Know your interests and your counterpart's interests extremely well, as far as you can. Don't settle for too little by setting yourself a target, making the first offer, asking for a concession when you make a concession. Before, always make the pie bigger and then split the pie. But don't forget to split the pie in an effective manner so you get enough value.
I have a comment about this not sharing on the reservation point. I was sharing with Natalia that I work on generics, and sometimes we agree based on margin for both companies. So sometimes when we set our target prices, they feel like we them off. They completely get offended, or the other way around. So we have cases when one of us disclosed completely the entire information, which is usually a no. Usually you would never share your books. But I had cases, I had situations when the supplier disclosed, or we disclosed a little bit more than we were supposed to. Just to, because both of us wanted to have a deal. So this is where like the rule didn't work. Or not died in like this consumption. We both want a deal and we both feel like we kind of have very thin line, like where we can have a connection, where we can have a win-win. So then we disclose a little bit more than.
Well, but remember what we're saying is exchange information about interest, priorities, and preferences. Avoid sharing information about reservation point, because then they'll take you to your reservation point, because they know that a deal is still good for you if you go down there, and you're still better off. And maybe they'll offer a little bit more, but they know that for you it's better to do the deal than not do the deal. Urgency simply indicates that you have a bad BADNA. So if you're desperate, you have a bad BADNA. And more than your BADNA, than not sharing your BADNA, is about not sharing the consequences of your BADNA. But you can say, look, I have another offer. I have another job offer, and it's a nice job offer. So I need a better offer from you if you want me to work with you. Okay, it's two things that I want you to keep in mind. Focus on the process, not the outcome. That, for me, was a game changer. When I started engaging negotiation, thinking about each phase of the process, instead of thinking about the outcome, focusing on the outcome. And the other one is the importance of preparation. Spending time preparing is fundamental. To get a mandate from your boss, that gives you flexibility to align your team and to anticipate, because part of the job of preparation is anticipating. Oh, I don't know their interests. I don't know their BADNA. They have more power than me. How can I shift the power? So you don't become reactive and you discover that at the table, and that's too late. Okay? Very well. So we're reaching, I don't know if you have other questions. We're going to end up a bit early. No questions? Pete, are you sure? There's last chance. Okay, well, I had a lot of fun. I hope this was useful for you. I have a gift for you before you leave. Here, okay, let me try to get my gift out. So this is something we designed so you can put in your wallet. And it has the negotiation process. It has your canvas, which you will receive as a PDF so you can use it. It's a workable canvas, you will see. And here is a summary of the best practices we covered today. Best practices to create value, best practices to claim value. And if you're really in dire straits, you have my email here. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I hope it was useful for you. Thank you. Thank you very much.